Hi, everyone. Before we get to today's episode, I just have a couple quick announcements. First, we are still in our fundraising drive, so if you want to support this podcast, donations are being matched. Also, we have a bunch of in-person programs coming up. You can join our mailing list to find out when we will have new online content, including recordings of those live programs available. All of that is on our website, jungchicago.org. Thanks.
Hello, this is Patricia Martin, and I'm your host for Jung and the World, coming to you from the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Joining me today is Glen Slater for a conversation about post-humanism as seen through a Jungian lens. Glen Slater is core faculty at Pacifica Graduate Institute, where he teaches depth psychology. His recent book, Jung and the Borg, Finding the Deeply Human in a Post-Human Age, takes the view that industrial disruption of the outer world is being followed by disruption of our inner worlds, creating a series of psychological accommodations and symptoms that we feel but do not understand. And he's here today to unpack some of that. Glen Slater, welcome to Jung and the World.
Thank you. It's very good to be with you.
So your book is premised on this idea of post-humanism, which has gotten a lot of attention in the last 10 years. And there have been philosophers who have written about it. There have been technologists who have written about it. And now you're coming at this idea of post-humanism from a Jungian perspective. And so I want to get clear on when you define post-humanism as a Jungian, what do you mean by that?
Well, it refers to the idea that technology is coming inside of us, that we can no longer think of ourselves as purely human because these things that we've created, both in our environment and the means by which we connect to others and the environment, are no longer just tools that we pick up and put down, but they're coming into us both mentally and physically. So in the end, I think the deep root of post-humanism is the idea of human-machine hybridization. But as you point out, there's been a lot of sort of secondary philosophical developments from this when people consider that, well, we're coming into a time when the purely human is no longer the phenomenon that we're all faced with. There are vast implications, philosophical and so forth. And that idea has come together with the postmodern idea that the purely humanistic way of thinking, particularly the Enlightenment form of humanism, is no longer adequate in order to understand our existential situation. So there's a lot of philosophical post-humanism that emphasizes, for example, the end of anthropomorphism and anthropomorphic views, and a need to think out of the box rather than in a narrowly humanistic way. And I'm partial to some of those sensibilities, particularly going beyond the anthropomorphic view. I mean, I think it's fair to say in the last 100 years, we've awoken to the fact that we're all part of this larger web of life. And we need to adjust our thinking in that way. But I also think that some of the more philosophical post-humanists have forgotten this original root of the human-machine hybridization. And we need to look at the implications of that, and I'm trying to look at the depth psychological implications.
Well, and I'm so grateful that you are, because I think your book takes a long view going backward to the inception of industrialization and a change in the relationship between the earth and humans, brought about by technology, like original technologies. And I think that this idea that you have, that we have slowly, gradually, speeding up all the time, though, we've been adapted to this. So it's been kind of a setup for post-humanism. Talk to me about some of that, how we've been acculturated now to this moment of the post-human.
Well, industrialization is probably the most dramatic change in human activity and lifestyle that has ever occurred, and the massive shift of people moving from country and village life into big cities and working in factories and engaging with machines and traveling by steam train here, there, and everywhere. And in the course of a generation, these extraordinary changes, backgrounded by the incredible developments in science and technology. And I think what's going on today parallels that in many respects, in that we have, over the course of a generation, adapted our lives to the online world and to working with computers and basically carrying around these devices which have become extensions of ourselves. So back in the late 19th century, people were already using terms like the animal machine to describe the industrial worker. There were already writers like Samuel Butler saying the machines are about to take over and go beyond us. And these are things that are happening today, but on a very different level. And I think just as then depth psychology emerged from this disruption, as Jung called it, a loss of instinct, a disconnection from nature that he saw as very much behind the emergence of psychological disorders. And I think too, where it's almost as though this is a second chapter in that story, and we haven't quite connected the dots yet. We haven't quite realized that the the digital age, sometimes called the post-industrial age, is also producing a particular kind of symptomatology, and perhaps depth psychology has something to say about that.
Well, you come out and speak it very clearly, it seems to me, when you talk about how we've adapted. And so this is a quote from your book. Quote, psychological accommodation has given rise to widespread narcissism and psychopathy in the collective, unquote. That's a bold assertion of our symptomatology. And when I say bold, I don't mean, I mean provocative. Because it doesn't take much hunting on the internet to find memes about narcissism and psychopathy with millions and millions of views. And so it's clear that the collective is encountering symptoms that it's trying to grapple with. And so, when you looked at the collective as if it were a patient, I was struck by how clearly you were able to point this out, that we have now entered an era of widespread narcissism and psychopathy. Oh, what more do you have to say about that?
Jung had this I think, basic insight into the nature of the psyche, which was the conscious and unconscious had a compensatory relationship, and that if our conscious attitudes and behaviors became too one-sided, there would be a commensurate movement or pushback from the unconscious. And I think we see the two sides of the digital age. One side is the sense of being very disoriented, very much awash in a sort of sea of information and competing meanings and interpretations. And so on the one side, people don't really know themselves, or they don't know themselves in context of community, in context of history. And there's a compensation by, declaring one's identity and in a way curating one's identity on social media and so forth.
And we call that authenticity.
Yes.
I just
Yes.
It's those ironies of living in the digital age.
Yes. Well, it's a deepening of what Jungians would think of as the persona field. It's not even honestly centered on the ego. And for a lot of digital natives in particular, their persona is more online than offline. And a lot of work goes into cultivating that. But, you talk about symptoms, I think we can look at, if we're looking at technology and thinking, well, what's wrong with our relationship with technology? We need go no further than the sort of obsessive compulsive quality of our interaction with many things. And I think the obsessive compulsive quality of checking social media, and used to be the Facebook page, but now for a lot of people that's old hat. But that goes to show how much energy there is to propping up one's identity. But I think this takes place against that other background of being existentially rather lost and at sea. So that would be one example.
You also talk about Jung's way of looking at the collective, and that he had spent a fair bit of time and intellectual effort to judge whether a society is conducive or detrimental to the individual. And he said, and you write about this in your book, that it can be judged by the system of symbols, whether or not a society is conducive or detrimental to the individual. And so I'm curious to get your take on the state of symbols in the hybrid culture. What's your assessment?
It's hard for me to think about the state of symbols without thinking about the state of our capacity to see symbolically. I think symbols abound. The real question is, do we have the sensibility to see them and to think symbolically? And a concern that I raise in the book is that we learn to think symbolically in via the cultural imagination, and the cultural imagination is supported by our education in the humanities, our engagement with the arts. I mean, these are the places outside of fields like depth psychology where people see the images that are animating a culture, the images that speak to the meaning of life, through reading novels or listening to music. And I'm a little concerned that this realm of culture is being depleted by our online world, the turn to AI, and the rhythms therein, and so therefore we're lacking that sort of symbolic function, which Jung saw as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious. And we all know that in terms of our individual lives and the dream images that we work with and the sort of spiritual beliefs and so forth. But there's a collective bridging between civilization and the deep nature of life. And I think that the cultural imagination functions in that way at its best. So I think something to think about is the way our digital lifestyles and the digital worlds may be eroding that symbolic function, that way of thinking.
I read recently a study that was done by two younger computer scientists about self-mythologizing online and how gamers and people who are active on the more fluid platforms will gather around an event or a situation or interact with a meme. And there's a fair bit of iconography or, archetypal characters, what we might think of as archetypal characters, symbols. And the difference is that the participants are chipping in their own personal story and data and linking it to what's going on. But then it all goes away. It's ephemeral and move on. There's no archive for it. It's all decentralized and atomized. So there's no opportunity for it to reside anywhere. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. Like, what's the impact of that psychologically on us when we can do it and we clearly want to engage with symbol, but there's nothing there to hold it?
What imagination, what symbolization requires is reflection. It is the capacity to sink into layers of meaning, and generally to do that we need to pause, we need to register our feeling response, and one of the contrasts I drew in the book is between the sort of horizontality of the digital world, the way in which there's so much information, more than we can possibly comprehend, and what we're short on is understanding, the ability to digest things, to put them in context. In other words, to generate more of a verticality of consciousness that would take us also down into the depths, remind us of the sort of ancestral lineage that preceded us, and give us a feeling of something to stand on. And I think this is another one of those vicious circles, that if you're caught in the horizontality of things and you're simply being distracted or entertained, or you use the word ephemeral, there are all of these ephemeral pleasures. The question is, what is left behind in terms of that verticality. So that would be one way of looking at that. Of course, I think it's important to point out that the internet, gaming, these things offer a lot of incredible creative opportunities. But again, we shouldn't focus on the content. We should focus on the style of consciousness that is going on when people take up these things. To me, that's the real litmus test. Does it lead to the feeling of being deeply satisfied, for example, as you would if you sat down and had coffee and a long conversation with a friend versus an exchange on, the Facebook page? And I'm skeptical that we're not getting enough of these experiences that lead to a sense of verticality.
It's a mixed bag in that when I talk to people who do a lot of online gaming and they've got elaborate community that they've developed up through that. And as you said, there's a creative expression to it. But, so I don't think, I'm speaking for them, I guess, but I don't think they believe they're wasting their time. But I also think that something has happened to us post-COVID whereby we're feeling the desire to be in physical contact again. We're missing that. And, you can just, this summer, I'm in the Midwest, and I paid a lot of attention to how big the crowds were for things like fireworks and ice cream socials. And there was a mix of generations, which led me to believe that people are yearning for something beyond what they can experience digitally. I don't know if you're observing any of that.
Yeah, I do think there's in a way, well, one phenomenon is a kind of backlash to the digital lifestyle where people have started to go on fast. So they've gone back to, analog technologies, and they've gone off social media. And that probably works for a lot of people in order to discover what aspects of life lay outside of this immersion in cyberspace and the online world. And I think in a way that's the thing here is to discover how to value what does lie outside the modality in order to then go forward with not just a balance, but in a conversation between the offline side of our experience and the online side of our experience, so that online world is shaped and directed in a way that's conducive to our total psychological and existential situation. At the moment, I don't think that's happening. I think we're in the sort of enthusiast phase of just diving headlong into the digital reality and experiencing all these symptoms without connecting the dots and realizing that the depression and anxiety that it's at epidemic levels among some demographics is really connected, and the people are doing important work on that. But it's what I refer to in the book as the need for a feedback loop. That if there was a conversation between all aspects of this experience, including the conducive things, and I realize people can find a sense of community online, but if there was a conversation between all aspects of our experience, then maybe the technological way forward could be redirected.
Well, I want to get back to this idea of verticality, depth psychology, being able to go deep. And it lifted off the page as I was reading this in your book, this idea of a second center. You make this fascinating argument about an inner core of deeper intelligence in the psyche that Carl Jung identified, and you go into it in a little more detail. Can you share that with us?
This seems very core to Jungian psychology, and if you study Jung's ideas, you see this appreciation for a deeper intelligence slowly emerged over time. Of course, it comes in a big way in his own, what he called confrontation with the unconscious, and his work that we now have in the Red Book. And he discovered these inner figures like Hillman, who seemed to carry a wisdom that was beyond his consciousness. And Jungians came to call this the self, often capitalized, and saw it as a second center in contrast to the ego center of consciousness. But often what gets lost is what takes us, what connects those two centers. And I think, once again, what connects is the ability to turn within, to work with the dreams, with the images that emerge, but also to know what feeds the soul for all of us. And that's, I think, where the arts and the cultural imagination come in. We need guides in order to relate to that second center. And we find that in spiritual pursuits, and then we discover it in our own way. But I think that's a way of that idea is a way of stating what would be the lead in the keel that might turn the direction of things when it comes to this seemingly post-human trajectory that we're on. I mean, do we really want to merge our minds with artificial intelligence, for example? If artificial intelligence is totally geared to the world of conscious information and doesn't really participate in this second center of gravity, this deeper wisdom that has an instinctual and archetypal basis, is that not over time going to create a massive one-sidedness in our lives, where we have all of this rational knowledge, but the knowledge that comes from the knowledge of the wisdom of the ages is somehow lost, and our ability to relate to that is lost.
Well, it makes me wonder, you reference Christopher Lash's Culture of Narcissism, and he makes the point in that book that Narcissus, as a god, does not have a lot of structure, or there's not a lot there. And yet, here we have a culture being built on it. And you point this out yourself, that we've surpassed the culture of narcissism to create a culture of psychopathy. And so it's been a while, and time goes faster, it's more condensed. So I wonder, as people begin to feel like the machines are not only present, but becoming omnipresent, and that sense of surrender and overwhelm, as if we're helpless to this. We're helpless to AI. What do we do about it? It's coming for us. What is your answer to that?
My overall answer is to wake up to what I describe as a disruption to our ecology of mind, borrowing that phrase from Gregory Bateson, that to realize that our our psyches also have an ecology, just like the outer world has an ecology. And that means taking into account multiple dimensions of things. And the difficulty is that, you talk about the culture of narcissism, and the thing most people don't realize about narcissism is that it has two sides. It has the sort of grandiose veneer that everyone recognizes, but underneath that's a terrible emptiness. And in a way that veneer is a compensation for that emptiness. And there's a lot of defensiveness against that emptiness too, through denial and splitting and projection and rationalization and some of these things that we see when we get into that. In psychopathy, a way to think about that is a state of mind where that tension between the inner emptiness and the outer veneer completely breaks, and you just have the veneer. You just have the fabrication, so that only the invented reality or the face that you put forward or this sort of outer gesture is what counts, and there is no inner reality. And this is why in psychopathy they say there's no capacity for empathy, because you don't really recognize the other person as a person, as having an inner life. And I know I'm putting a lot on the table here, but the idea I think we have to contemplate is the extent to which the digital age is drawing us more and more into the fabricated, or what Baudrillard would call the hyperreal. That the actuality of things has become less important than their representation, their simulation. And in those, under those circumstances, I think our ecology of mind goes out the window. So we could say that what is it we neglected in the industrial age was the sense of the interconnectedness of things in the outer world. And now in the digital age, we're discarding the interconnectedness of things in the inner world, and the fact that we can't just be these facades and internet personalities. Our souls are going to suffer at best, and perhaps be lost at worst.
So it's interesting, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about Ray Kurzweil's idea of the singularity, and how this sort of fabricated synthetic simulation of a self is a lot easier than it is kind of priming us to have the part of the singularity that Kurzweil talks about, where our consciousness just gets uploaded into the cloud. It's easier if it's less complicated, if it's completely horizontal and not vertical and not integrated, if it's one-sided, as you talk about, it's a lot easier to upload. And so if you think about the future and what we want for our children and our children's children, we want depth. We want them to have a rich and capacious and loving life, so that they can experience the full totality of what it is to be human. It's something worth working on. And every book has a mission, I believe. So I'm curious about Jung and the Borg. What was your mission when you wrote it? What did you want to achieve?
I think to put on the table the importance of the psyche and the importance of understanding the psyche in this fuller, more complete way that includes the body, that includes the instincts, that includes our relationship to the world. I mean, really, if we take a phenomenological view to our psychological lives, as Jung did, we are mind, body, world entities. So the idea of taking the mind out of the body, for example, is anathema to the idea of the psyche. I think somewhere Jung simply says, no body, no psyche. And that has something to do with the way in which we are instinctual beings. We are biological beings, and we have evolved in relationship to this particular earth. The singularity is the idea that the time is fast approaching where artificial intelligence will surpass us, and therefore the only option we will have is to try to keep up with it. And that will lead then to these kind of hybridized, perhaps a new species, where we blend with the AI and we blend with robotics. But if people are thinking of human intelligence as comparable to artificial intelligence, right there is where the fork in the road is, because, and I think this is a very contemporary implication of what I'm writing about, is for people to realize there's nothing going on in AI. AI is very capable, but there's no one home. There's AI doesn't understand what it's talking about. For example, it can play a great game of chess, but it doesn't know what chess is. It doesn't know the history. It doesn't know what competitiveness is all about. As people have said of the chatbots that everyone's so enamored of, their sophisticated sentence completion. It's sentence completion software. So it is going to change the world, and it is going to help in multiple ways. But we need to realize it's not in any way a mind, as we would think of a mind, let alone a psyche. So the point is, if we want to put all our eggs in that basket, we're going to leave a lot of ourselves on the table. And all I'm trying to say in the book is, yes, we live in a technological world. Yes, computers are not going away. AI is the next stage. But we need to focus on what we're leaving behind and what will ensure our ecology of mind. Otherwise, I think we'll suffer the same kind of collapse inwardly as we've started to see outwardly.
So as you teach and encounter people, I know you speak around the world, is there I don't want to oversimplify your thinking because you're really a profound thinker, Glenn, but do you get asked questions about what's the antidote? What do you recommend? What can you? So here I am asking you, what's the antidote?
I think the first antidote, which Jungians will particularly relate to, is simply to become more conscious. To pay attention to what is actually happening to us, to our sense of satisfaction, dissatisfaction, to the kind of symptoms that are arising, and to realize that these things are not anomalous, that they have something to teach us about the way we're living, the what our minds are doing. And to me, then what follows that is a reevaluation of values. What is most valuable? Is a sense of meaning and purpose and soul something that is vital, or something that if we think we can just be ultra intelligent and have our fingertips on every piece of information whenever we want, that is that enough? Is that what we have been brought here to do in this sort of only experiment in conscious life that we know about?
It's kind of a call to live a full life.
Yes.
To live the fullest life you can live.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. And that's very challenging at a time when I think there is a lot of, and I make this a pivot in the book, a lot of dissociation that stems from that horizontality where we're pulled in so many directions, that stems from having so many distractions, that stems from this sort of loss of more of a verticality and sense of rootedness. And so to me, that's the pivot that runs through what I'm talking about here. Can we have a more integrative style of being present to what's going on versus a more dissociative style? And then if so, and this is where I come out at the end of the book, I wonder whether we might be on the threshold of a new countercultural movement that attempts to recover what it is that is of deep value, that is of deep significance in terms of this human experiment, that might enhance the cultural imagination in a way that's seemingly not happening right now. But it has to be a counterculture with more philosophical rigor than the last one. I think the counterculture, the 60s and 70s, which incidentally, the term counterculture was coined by Theodore Roszak, and he said this was a reaction to the technocracy of that time. Well, maybe there's a second counterculture that's a reaction to the technocracy we're swimming in, but perhaps one that has a little more philosophical rigor. And this is where I think Jungian psychology can maybe help out, because the understanding of the psyche that Jung offers us helps us really see where we might be going astray right now and what else needs to be brought back into the picture.
That's so helpful. Thank you. That it gives us something to hope for, and time will tell. But I think you're really onto something. And your book contributes to what I believe is a rising philosophical class in the digital culture that is calling these things into question, using some of our foundational ideas as a society, including the work of Carl Jung, to just reimagine how this might be different. Thank you for sharing all of your wisdom with us today on Jung in the World. This is one of the best parts of my job, that I get to talk about these things. So I want to thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been really great talking with you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about training programs, live and self-study courses, archives, this podcast, our blog, or to find Jungian analysts near you, visit our website, jungchicago.org. Thank you to our 2023 donors who gave at the contributor level or above. Barbara Anand, PhD in honor of Fred Maples, S.J., Uni Alcott, Judith and Eric Cooper, David Dalrymple, Mary Doherty, Full Bloom Lotus Center for Self-Awareness, Boris Matthews, Bruce G. and Mary A. Robert Family Foundation, Diane Sherwood, Lawrence C. Tingley, Alexander Wayne and Lynn Kopp, and the Blackbaud Giving Fund. You can support this podcast by making a donation at our website, jungchicago.org.